Manfred von Richthofen began his military career as a cavalryman before being transferred to the German Air Service in 1915. I won't attempt to pronounce the names of the squadrons he fought with, as I would undoubtedly butcher the pronunciations, but he had an outstanding career as a fighter pilot, and by all accounts he was regarded as a national hero in Germany. His enemies were said to respect him as an objectively talented pilot. Richthofen held the title of nobility in German, which is most often translated to English as Baron. During his career, he painted his aircraft red. These two factors combined gave him the notorious title of Red Baron during World War I. The Red Baron served with several different squadrons and used multiple aircraft variants. He was officially credited with 80 air combat victories during his career, being considered the top ace of World War I. According to military records and first-hand accounts, the Red Baron was not an exceptional pilot by any standard. What made him so successful were his combat tactics and marksmanship. Richthofen shot down numerous adversaries and rivals during the war. As a result of his many achievements, Richthofen was given the duties of a lieutenant colonel, but was never officially promoted past Rittmeister, which was a relatively low rank. On April 21st of 1918, the Red Baron was chasing a member of the Canadian Royal Air Force at a low altitude over Morlancourt Ridge in France. At the time, Richthofen's cousin Wolfram was also flying in this area, and the Canadian pilot Wilfrid May opened fire on Wolfram. Seeing this, the Red Baron fired on May, which made him pull out of the attack. The Red Baron continued chasing May and was briefly attacked by another Canadian pilot, Captain Roy Brown. Richthofen evaded Brown's attack and continued the chase, almost as if he was hyperfixated on his target. However, the chase came to an early end when Richthofen was struck in the chest by a bullet. The round damaged his heart and lungs, killing him in less than a minute. His plane stalled, began an uncontrolled dive to the ground, and crashed in a field that was located in an area under the control of the Australian Imperial Force. The Red Baron's infamous spree of successful missions had suddenly been stopped. But the question remains to this day: who fired the bullet that killed Manfred von Richthofen? At first, the Canadian pilot Roy Brown was given credit for the kill. He had been flying in the area at the time and he had opened fire on the Red Baron shortly before the crash. However, this simply doesn't make sense. An examination of Richthofen's body revealed the bullet had penetrated the right underarm and exited his body next to the left nipple. Roy Brown had attacked the Red Baron from behind and above to the left. It would have also been impossible for Richthofen to continue the chase for as long as he did if the bullet had been fired by Brown. Many sources over the years have credited an Australian soldier, Sergeant Cedric Popkin, with the kill. Popkin was a gunner who was using a Vickers machine gun on the day in question. This specific weapon used the same caliber of bullet as the one that killed Richthofen. He was also known to have opened fire on the Red Baron twice that day. Other sources have claimed other killers, but none of them have as much evidence as Cedric Popkin. However, Richthofen's killer is not the only mystery to come from his death. You see, Richthofen was highly experienced and routinely advised fellow pilots not to take unnecessary risks, including flying at a low enough altitude for ground forces to have a clear shot at you. On the day of his death, Richthofen disobeyed his own advice. This was unusual to say the least. Like I mentioned earlier, he was an outstanding tactician and rarely showed this sort of lacking judgment. Some medical researchers have suggested that Richthofen's poor decision-making may have been the result of a head wound he had sustained earlier in the war. His behavior after initially sustaining the wound was consistent with the behavior of brain-injured patients, and this theory would explain why he seemed hyperfixated on taking down one target. It's also possible that he was suffering from cumulative combat stress, a condition caused by the trauma that accompanies war. This could also explain his lack of judgment on the day of his death. One final theory states that the wind conditions that day could have contributed to the situation. The wind speed that day was normal, but the direction was unusual. Instead of blowing westerly, it had been blowing easterly. It's possible that the Red Baron was traveling at a much faster speed than normal as a result of the wind, and he therefore strayed into enemy territory on accident without even realizing his mistake. Unfortunately, the truth behind this mystery will likely never be discovered for certain. Whatever the case, it's chilling to speculate about the events that led to a man's death, especially a man as revered and respected as the Red Baron. In December of 1966, a man named Ralph Ziegler arrived in Mexico City and began working as a double agent for the United States. The American Embassy in Mexico was one of America's headquarters for Soviet espionage at the time. Ziegler's very first notable action as a double agent was delivering a set of documents to the KGB that detailed U.S. missile development plans. These plans were fake and gave incorrect information on how to develop the missiles. Throughout his career following this first mission, Ziegler would feed misinformation to the Soviet Union, causing the Soviets to spend years developing missiles that did not work. The other duty Ziegler had was to expose Soviet spies to the FBI, which he did. When the FBI asked Ralph to keep this duty a secret, he agreed to do so. In 1976, Ralph traveled to San Francisco and was given a polygraph exam by U.S. Army intelligence. According to the results of the exam, he lied when he was asked about the information he had given the Soviets. Some people speculated that he had possibly developed a relationship with a Soviet spy who he had ousted to the FBI, but this claim was never substantiated. After failing the polygraph exam in San Francisco, Ziegler was given more polygraphs and he failed each time. Following this, he was scheduled to undergo a rigorous interrogation process that involved being treated like a traitor. 24 hours before this process was set to begin, Ziegler called his wife for the last time. According to his wife, Ziegler sounded distraught and advised her to hire a lawyer in order to sue the United States Army. His final words during the call were, "I'm dying. I never lied." On April 13th of 1976, at 11 p.m., Ralph Ziegler was found dead in his motel room in Maryland. The police conducted an investigation in which they could find no signs of a struggle. The locks on his door had been double-locked from the inside. The police and army both ruled his death a suicide. They claimed he had most likely wrapped electrical wiring around his arms and electrocuted himself. There were 2 chairs stacked one on top of the other in his room, which they claimed he had used to position himself next to the light switch. During his funeral, Ziegler's daughter noticed some things that seemed inconsistent with suicide. For example, his nose was broken, several of his teeth were missing, and his body had numerous marks and bruises, including injuries on his arms that the investigators had claimed were made by electrical wiring. When 2 journalists brought this up to an electrical expert, the expert said the injuries on Ziegler's arms could not possibly have come from the circuit found in the room. They also learned that during the polygraph exams, Ziegler was told he would not be prosecuted if he told the truth. This made the theory of suicide even less likely. The strongest theory about what happened to Ralph Ziegler is that he was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by Soviet agents. The KGB has a known history of using electrocution as a method of torture, and it has been speculated that they were attempting to get some kind of secret information from Ziegler. What this information was has never been explained. What happened that fateful day has also never been conclusively proven. The only thing we know for certain is that being a double agent has its fair share of risks. The Vietnam War, a tale of horror and tragedy for countless Americans and Vietnamese natives. The war was notoriously controversial and resulted in roughly 1.3 million deaths, including many innocent civilians. The Vietnam War is also infamous for something else: brutal guerrilla warfare. The Vietnamese jungle was a place of massive bloodshed for both sides of the war. While campaigning through the jungle, both American and Vietnamese forces encountered something very strange. There were numerous reports of ape-like creatures attacking human soldiers in the jungle. These creatures were said to have 5-inch-long fangs, and they were capable of climbing the steep rocks of the jungle with ease. One location specifically produced so many reports of these creatures that the area became known as Monkey Mountain. These creatures had red hair, ape-like faces, long limbs, protruding stomachs, and they lived in packs. They came to be known as rock apes amongst the American soldiers because of how often they would throw rocks at unsuspecting soldiers. The Vietnamese soldiers called them Batatuts, or jungle people. Apologies for my poor pronunciation. Strangely, rock apes did not seem to fear humans. Unlike most other animals, the jungle people would allow humans to come very close to them, often without the humans even knowing they were there. Some have speculated that this calm demeanor was caused by living in the quiet jungle, while others have suggested that the creatures knew they could easily overpower human adversaries. Now, you might be wondering why the existence of these creatures is even a mystery at all. After all, they were discovered in the jungle, which is home to all sorts of exotic animal life. The strange thing is that Vietnam does not have any native apes. The country's orangutan population also went extinct thousands of years before the war. Furthermore, despite countless reports about these creatures, no evidence has been found to support their existence in the years following the war. No bodies were ever found, and the soldiers never took any pictures of the creatures. In 1974, the general of the Vietnamese army organized a mission to capture and study rock apes, but none were ever found during the expedition. An independent Vietnamese professor performed a study in which he found non-human footprints and cast them in cement. None of this research ever provided a solid answer as to what the creatures were. One theory suggests that the soldiers may have been hallucinating from a combination of heat, stress, and trauma. Marijuana was also extremely common for soldiers to smoke during the war, although it's uncommon for marijuana to cause hallucinations. In the stressful and traumatic environment of the Vietnam War, however, it's possible that it could have been a contributing factor. Another theory speculates that the rock apes are a species of primate native to the Vietnamese jungle. This theory suggests the reason the creatures have never been found after the war is because the locals avoid the jungle to this day. You see, thousands of live landmines are still scattered throughout the jungle, waiting to be triggered. This means the truth behind the mystery of the rock apes will likely never be discovered, or at the very least, it won't be discovered anytime soon.